Hey guys, Eric here from Crumbling Cube, and today we're doing something a little bit different. A few attentive viewers last week noticed something in the video, or rather something that wasn't.
Freedom. She lived in a time when kings and their...
Jin's narration was strangely missing and Team RWBY wasn't present in the footage. Now, since I'm on a trip to the UK for the next little while, I thought this would be a good chance to delve into some of the more advanced edits that go into RWBY Thoughts. Now, this isn't meant to be a comprehensive deep dive or tutorial, but rather a general overview. Given how the series comes out once a week, there isn't too much that we can do in our limited time, but doing a few simple things really adds a lot of production value to some of these videos. Usually these can be simple, like cutting something out for comedy.
There is no beating Salem.
You're wrong. We've done things that most people would call impossible.
RWBY!
Right, now back to removing Jin. To make it simple, there really is no magic filter or button to do this. It required a complete rebuild of the sound design in the episode, which is really simpler than it sounds. So when I'm doing this, usually I'll look for everything that's happening in the scene. In the first scene, for example, we have Salem's footsteps and the music, the latter of which is why it took so long for this video to come out. I really wasn't happy with Jin interrupting every now and again when I did Ozpin's side for this story, so waiting on the music was my best bet. Once I've determined what I needed, I'll hunt for a while on YouTube or on free sound effects websites for something that fits and has decent-ish quality. After I have my assets, I'll sync up the sound effects to what's going on in the scene. Salem's wearing a pretty long dress here, and you can't really see her footfall, so you have to use a little bit of finesse and guesswork. Then comes the music. Technically, I didn't really have to sync this up to the way it was in the show, but I'm really going for bonus points here. I'll usually listen to the track, find a point that's easily syncable, so in this case, a crescendo right here, and line it up. Now it's time to get mixing. And then comes the music. I see our music's hovering around -27 in the actual show, so I can adjust accordingly in the gain window. But there is no generation that we're competing with here in terms of our music, so we can actually have it a bit louder than it was in the show. That way things don't feel kind of, awkwardly quiet. Then comes the panner, which is one of the less obvious tools. This determines how far left or right something is in a stereo sound setup. And done. Now I would have liked to finesse this a little more, for example keyframing the panner and volume and then EQing some of the sound effects so they sound more natural, but we're really up against the clock here. And then it's just a matter of repeating this process for any other scenes that need this process done. Now the only thing that was pretty tough to find a replacement for was the panting. It's not bang on with Salem or Oz's panting in the actual show, but having it synced up with music, background sound effects, and any other miscellaneous ambience really makes it believable. And unless someone's pedantic enough to compare it to the actual episode, you're not really gonna notice the difference. But of course, now that I've said that, you are comparing the panting in the video versus the real episode. Oh boy. Now, one of the things that really sucked about this episode is that our heroes are sticking around the background constantly as a way of experiencing the past. Now, this is a really cool narrative element in the context of the episode, but that's not what I'm going for here. So in order to remove them, I just did some very basic compositing in After Effects. Using frames where RWBY's not present, I can stitch together this semi-clean plate of sorts. Semi because if it were a fully clean plate, then Salem wouldn't be here. Then, using some motion tracking, or in this case it was faster to actually manually keyframe it, I can put the image on top, feather it a bit, and there you go. Thankfully, the camera only moves about the x-axis here, and lens distortion is minimal, so it was pretty easy. Now there are other cases where you'll simply have to edit around what you're given. So for example, in this shot, I can't really paint Yang out because she's just kind of stationary there. So a quick crop was the solution here. Same goes for this shot where Weiss is. In theory, I could have painted them out given enough time, but really, once again, we are up against the clock here. This show comes out once a week. Now for another simple-ish one, some of you may have noticed that Yang's eyes were tinted green instead of red in the Adam video. This was to sell the Super Saiyan gag, which I don't think too many people got, but oh well, better for those who did. Real quick, this was relatively simple to do. Create an adjustment layer, mask of the parts that I wanted changed, and then apply a simple color replace. Oh, and then you have to rotoscope her eyes frame by frame using the mask, which is admittedly kind of a tedious process, but it is definitely worth it. Admittedly, they're closer to teal now that I'm looking, but I thought of this idea literally the morning of the video's release, so yeah, just could have checked it a little more, I guess. And now what I consider to be the crown jewel of RWBY Thoughts video editing, the Pokemon battle. Oh god, you know, I don't exactly remember how I got fixated on this idea, but I wanted to have some sort of Pokemon battle with Weiss because that's what her abilities really reminded me of. And this seemed to be really the ideal point to do it. First things first, we gotta prep our assets. So there are quite a few here. There's Weiss, Hazel, the Queen Lancer, and the Pokemon Emerald interface itself. Having downloaded some gameplay footage, I began taking note of what I needed and what was already pre-built for me. There's just one problem though. RWBY's characters aren't necessarily pixel art, so I had to run them through a quick Photoshop process, and that was that. Tracking the movements of Steven and Brennan here are pretty easy, and it really does help sell the segment because the animation timings are exactly the same as they are in the game. Then came the actual text. This was really a trial and error determining the exact spacing between characters, the font size, how much drop shadow to use, etc, but once I got it, it was pretty worth it, and it was pretty easy to actually animate the reveal effect. I would have liked to finesse this a little more just so it reveals character by character as opposed to a smooth wipe, but once again I think it was about 1 AM when I finished this effect and I really didn't want to stay up any longer. As you can see, this process was very convoluted and complicated for what amounts to a 10-second gag in a dumb internet video, and that's why it really wasn't much longer. I think I want to revisit this idea someday in some capacity, but I think I'll set it off to the side now. Alright, I hope you guys found that little look behind the curtain entertaining. Would you like to see more behind the scenes stuff like this? If so, please let us know by hitting like, commenting, sharing, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Also, please consider checking out the links below and supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for watching.